In the following video, we're going to examine the factoring technique of factoring by grouping. When factoring by grouping, you use this when you have four or more terms in the polynomial you're trying to factor. And the way you need to think about factoring by grouping is you're kind of pairing your polynomial together in different groups, and you're pairing and applying, the GCF technique, maybe multiple times with multiple parents. So if we look at this kind of formula, this setup for it, if you have RA plus RB plus SA plus SB, if I were to look at it, I have four terms. If I were just to examine the four terms, you see the first two terms both have an R in common. And, the last two terms both have an S in common. And so if I were to kind of look at applying my GCF with this first grouping, they both have an R. So I can take out an R from them. If I were to take out an R from both of these, I'd be left with A plus B. If I look at this second setting, I have SA plus SB. There's another GCF in this grouping, and that GCF is S. So if I take out that S, again, I'd be left with just A plus B. And so now if we look at this step, we really have two terms, this R times A plus B and this S times A plus B. And we notice that they both have an A plus B in common. And so what this means is we can actually take that A plus B out from both of them, put it over here, and if we were to remove the A plus B, because that is the GCF of this part, put it over here, we are left with R plus S. And so if we look at it, we've applied, when factoring by grouping, we're applying the GCF in multiple times based off of how we pair or how we group the items together. So overall, our steps are to group the terms. One thing that you may need to do is you may need to rearrange them. And to rearrange them, to know if you need to, is try and put terms with like variables near each other together. Factor out the GCF for each term, and then group the GCF together and write the final answer. So let's try a walkthrough problem. I have b cubed minus 3b squared plus 4b minus 12. If I look at this, this can't follow any of my other techniques. All four terms don't share a GCF. I don't have difference of squares. I don't have factor and trinomial. So I'm going to try factoring by grouping because I have four or more terms. So if I were to group them and focus on the first set of parentheses, the first grouping, and maybe try grouping this way, and we can see what happens. If I look at b cubed minus 3b squared, I see they both have a b squared in common. So I'm going to factor that out. And if I factor that out, I'm left with a b minus 3. If I look at my next pairing, I have positive 4b and negative 12. That GCF is a positive 4. If I factor that out, I'm left with b minus 3. And so at this point if your factoring by grouping, if your pairing was correct, because your two parentheses you have left should be exactly the same. And what happens is I have these in common, so I can factor out this b minus 3. And then you look at what remains, and what remains is my b squared plus 4. And so this is the factoring by grouping technique. Either pair them together or group them together and apply the GCF. Make sure what remains when you take out the GCF and the parentheses are the same for both groupings. Take that out, factor that out, and then write down what you remain, and just make sure this operation comes down inside the parentheses. So let's try another example. in the other videos that will build our skill and knowledge of factoring by grouping. If you need a refresher, you can just go back and look at the formula and technique used in this intro. If you want to move forward in the next videos on factoring by grouping, go ahead.